Nana, bless your heart, already here.
Woo-hoo.
Thank you for sticking with us.
She was like, I'm so glad you posted on the Instagram story. And I was like, I should have texted you. That's on me. But yeah.
And I figure we can just give it like a couple minutes and then go ahead and start. I don't remember if this was during our last discussion that I mentioned this, but Kira and I were talking, and she like loves watching past classics, and she was like, I love how the longer you guys go on, you just pick more niche books every time. And he's like, you start out with like the Brontes, and now it's like little known vampire story by Alexandre Dumas.
Well, initially I feel like we were like, we want everyone to enjoy classics. Let's start with this like well-known, accessible work. And then when we hit a point of being like, it doesn't matter who is watching or how many people are reading with us, this is our book club and we read what we want, we just started picking whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it's fun to have...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Taylor.
Some of them are still like traditional classics, and other ones are books filled with freaks. So
yeah.
And it's still a well-known author, to be fair.
Yeah. It is. It's like I feel like I understand now why there's not a lot of editions of this one. It was an interesting ride.
We're gonna get into it.
Yeah. And I feel like it's fun too to pick books for different reasons. I feel like that's a nice way to get variety. Like sometimes we end up hosting the one that we like the least, and sometimes it's like everyone else has read this one and I don't know anything it's about. So okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Obviously people might still be showing up. Since it's been a little while, by the way, thank you everyone for being patient with our scheduling changes. All three of us have had just various things. Like I think anybody who has ever been part of a group video thing knows that this happens, but we appreciate your patience with us. So let's do like brief intros from you guys. I have already linked Julia and Taylor in the description. And yeah, if you just want to say, I don't know, for your introduction, since we do this all the time. Taylor, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm Taylor from Page Screen Taylor, and when I posted Once Upon a Time, I posted videos on like fantasy and romance and classics, just sort of, I read across the board. I would say now, and with my dream of like getting my channel back in business, I read mostly romance now, the occasional high fantasy book, and classics. Yeah, so that's me. One day I'll post.
I like how every time you introduce yourself, you get like less and less certain about the existence of your channel. Like in a few months.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just thinking it's like in a few months you're gonna be like, I think I saw a video once.
I was literally gonna say like in a couple of months it's gonna be me saying, hi, I am read smudged writing on hand. Taj Scantaler.
Yeah. Yes. Just like no clue about your own channel.
Yes.
I'm Julia, and my channel is called Shakespeare and Such, and I do post videos again. There have been 2 this year, maybe 3. Wow. Astounding.
And
like 3 are in the process of being edited. So things are actually happening. Turns out, if you pay someone to edit things for you, being a booktuber is a lot more convenient. So,
life hack.
And if that person's your friend, then it really works out great. So, yes. Highly recommend to anyone who doesn't like editing. But yeah, I read pretty widely, although I will say, in recently going through my TBR, I literally, what is that? I sounded like the mom who had the lipstick in her Valentina bag. She was like, oh. That's the sound I just made. Recently going through my bookshelves and being like, what can I clear out of here to make room for new books that I read and enjoy? Realizing I just don't really read sci-fi ever. Like that's just not a thing that I do. So, I mean, spoiler alert, I think I'm just going to do a reading vlog of like, can I like sci-fi and read a couple of those?
Ooh.
Because I own maybe like 3. I think I own 3 sci-fi books that I have not read. So that's interesting. But yeah, I love historical fiction and classics and romance and a combination of any of those, and especially historical fantasy. That is my jam.
Historical fantasy is a good one.
It's just
like peak genre combination.
The perfect niche, I feel.
Yes.
And it so perfectly allows for like a romance plot line too. So it's great.
It really does.
Yes.
So hi everyone, I'm Kara. My channel is obviously Wild Book Garden. I do make videos fairly consistently, although I do not stay up to date with wrap-ups and things like that. So apologies if you follow me. You might be seeing the books I read in April like in 3 months, but you will see them. It will happen. I read a lot of fantasy, historical fiction, also classics, nonfiction, contemporary, like a little sprinkling of romance. And I also don't read a ton of sci-fi, I'm realizing. And like Julia, I'm a historical fantasy enthusiast. I truly feel it is the best of both worlds. It's great. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to mention the content warnings briefly. If I can find where I put them. There we go. And then we'll kind of start out with our overall thoughts as we usually do. Okay, so content warnings for murder, grief, attempted sexual assault, misogyny, and kind of general xenophobia / not like racism, but like I don't know.
Xenophobia is the perfect word. I actually wrote that in one of my annotations. I was like, wow, the xenophobia really popped off here. Okay.
Yeah. So those are some things that are like at least several of them will be coming up in discussion. So just be aware of that. And yeah, let's go ahead and start off. So we read The Pale Lady.
I was going to say, did you say what book we read?
Yeah, it's in the title, Julia.
Okay.
Oh, the Pale Lady is coming.
Yes. Taylor.
We're discussing, like, I think we might know why there's not many editions of this one. It's a very, I would say a very little known story by a very famous author. And if we want to do, in addition to kind of overall thoughts and rating, we've all obviously read Three Musketeers, which was a time. If you want to mention any other experience you've had with Alexandre Dumas, and I also thought it'd be kind of fun to mention any other like classic vampire stories that you've read. And I'm saying classic very broadly, like basically old vampire stories.
Yeah, Twilight, you mean, right?
Right, yeah, sure.
I think at this point it is considered old.
Truly. Anyways.
Yeah. Julia, do you want to start?
Yeah. So, funny story. Read this in a very timely fashion, like early for our live show. So proud of myself. Here we are 2 months later, and I was like, I don't know anything that happened. Yeah. So I reread it today and like tabbed it up. I legitimately like annotated it for my second reread. And the second time around, I was like, maybe I was too harsh. Like the writing's not as bad as I thought. The story kind of grew on me and made a little more sense. And weirdly enough, I gave it the exact same rating. So turns out my opinion did not change. The formula doesn't lie. So I gave it 2.6 stars. I think it had a really strong foundation of what could have been a great story. The execution, not my favorite. And I also, because we all read the same edition, I feel like there's some bad translation going on that's to blame for some of the weird writing.
Yes, I definitely agree, especially because like as much as I hated Three Musketeers, it's like I don't think Alexandre Dumas is a bad writer, like in terms of his writing style. And I've actually read other things by him that I have enjoyed. So yeah, I think translation can definitely be a factor. And it's especially hard when not only are there basically no other editions to choose from, but like I don't even know who the translator is. I could not find that anywhere.
Yeah.
They're like, I do not want to be associated with this project.
Like, me neither.
There's almost no like original like copyright information too. Like it has copy at 2013 by Red Books Limited. I don't know if they're real, but it does sound like, oh no, I read this book.
It's like one of those public domain classics where you're like, can I trust this?
Yeah, literally. So yeah, not outstanding, but obviously, like you said, we all read not the Count of Monte Cristo, The Three Musketeers together. Not my favorite. I have read the Count of Monte Cristo, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I think it's a wonderful book. Yes. So at this point, I don't know what my feelings on this man are because he's really hit or miss. But this one's not a new favorite, although I think I could use it as a basis for a fantastic story. TBH.
Yeah, the premise is good. And then any like classic vampire stories that you want to mention that you've read or?
Yes, I forgot that part of the question. I have not read Dracula, strongly considering forcing us to read it for Past Classics one of these days. I have read Carmilla. And I have read Twilight. I think it's just Carmilla.
Okay.
What other classic vampire stories are there?
I know
those were kind of the ones I was thinking of.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe I'm forgetting an obvious one.
No. I am Googling classic vampire novels in another tab right now because I'm like, I can think of like one, but I'm sure. Anyway, Taylor, so overall thoughts and rating, and then other context for Alexandre Dumas and vampire stories, vampire classics.
Ooh, okay. So, so I have read the Alexandre Dumas 3 times. We have The Pale Lady, we have The Three Musketeers, and we have The Count of Monte Cristo. And I feel like I can tell my feelings on a book based off of how much I claim his blackness. Like, The Count of Monte Cristo, I was like, yes, oh my God, preach, brother. And then when I was reading like The Three Musketeers, I was like, this is some white boy shit.
What kind of white foolishness?
And then with this one, I'm like, yeah, it's my, we're both mixed. We've got that in common.
I love that as like a rating scale for you.
For one specific author.
One author, yeah. Yep.
Also, sorry to swear, I did not expect to say white boy.
That's okay.
I will say I think I like this more than you guys did. I think I'm going to give it about 3 stars. And most of my enjoyment comes from the fact that it's a book filled with freaks, and I kind of love that. No one has any chill. Everyone's just really weird. No one's making any sense. I just feed off of that. Like it's like a circus. In terms of vampire books, I feel like I haven't read a lot. I had my unfortunate Twilight phase in middle school where, oh God, I don't think I've thrown out the shirts yet, but I had like an Edward shirt with his face just.
Oh my gosh. I had a Team Edward shirt as well, I think.
I definitely had a shirt.
At least we were on kind of the right team.
Were we?
One didn't fall in love with the baby.
That's true. Like
well,
that's where the bar is.
Perspective.
That's where the bar is in those books.
And I've read Dracula, and Dracula, amazing. Like I couldn't ask for a better vampire book. It is the vampire book for a reason. And other than that, I've read like books with vampires in them. So like the Dresden Files, where they have vampires, and A Discovery of Witches, where they had like vampire yoga. Sure. Vampire yoga. I didn't like the book very much, but that is the one thing that stood out.
It's memorable.
It stays with you. Yeah. But that's about it. I feel like I would love to read more vampire books, preferably with more freaks. The more freaks, the better.
All right.
Sorry. Just because we're talking about vampires, I do want to just preemptively give a shout out to what will be my favorite vampire book, which is Dracula and Lucy by Kirsten White, probably going to be published in 2024.
I'm excited.
I love her so much.
I didn't know that was coming out.
Oh yeah. And it's her first adult. No, it's not her first adult, but it's like her first adult retelling. So that's exciting.
Interesting. Okay. So overall, I think similar feelings on this story. I gave it a 2-star. I think because the premise was so intriguing, it almost made me more disappointed in it because it just, the bones of the story could have been so interesting. And I was just like, what is this? What is this? Yeah, and I think we all have the same experience with Alexandre Dumas, which is funny because we discussed Three Musketeers, but then we've all individually read Count of Monte Cristo, which I think is fantastic. So I am also conflicted about how I feel about Mr. Dumas. I will say though, it was fascinating to read a vampire story from this era that I had never heard of. I think that was very cool, and there were aspects of it that I think were interesting. We'll get into with some of the discussion. It's there's a couple of scenes that I think were really fantastic where I feel like you can see what the story could have been. But it wasn't as offensive as the Three Musketeers was. It was just kind of okay. As for other vampire classics, I also have read Dracula, and I agree with everything you said, Taylor. I feel like it is peak vampire classic. I strongly believe it is the best of the monster classics. So yeah, I would love to read it from Past Classics if Julia does decide to assign it. But and then also, I'm glad I did Google vampire classics because I knew there was another one that I couldn't remember. I've also read Fledgling by Octavia Butler, which I think definitely should be considered a modern vampire classic.
I can't believe you've read Fledgling.
Yeah, it's very good. It is very disturbing, but I think it's intentional, but that doesn't always make up. I don't know. It's a fascinating book.
I feel what's her name again? Octavia Butler. Yeah. Tend to lean towards the disturbing, and it's a purposeful disturbing, but it's still well, I need to eat an entire 3 bags of party-sized M&Ms to get over my depression now.
Yeah, it's I think because not to get too far into Fledgling, but the thing that got me about it is not that it did some of the things it did of a prepubescent girl. I think it's she's commenting on the tropes in vampire stories and having romances between humans and people who've been around for hundreds of years. So I think that's intentional. The thing that actually really icked me out about it is that so the main character has sexual relations with various humans that she feeds on, which is a lot of times those things go together, and she's in the body of a young child. And the thing that made me uncomfortable is that some of the men, specifically these grown-ass men who are sexually attracted to this young child, they're written in ways where it's I feel we're still supposed to like you, and I don't. I really don't care what happens to you, but you're obviously a good guy. I don't know. So just lots of content notes for Fledgling, but it is a very good one and very interesting. Okay, sorry. We already got off track. It's first question.
You going, oh no, we won't have much to talk about. We're 20 minutes into the live show. We didn't start it yet, Kara.
I know. I played myself. It's fine. Okay, so I don't have as many specific questions, I feel as usual, but we'll go ahead and get into characters a little bit. This is such a short story that I feel I don't know, we'll probably end up talking about things together a lot of times. Also, Julia, you were saying how the story just left your brain. I was writing down my notes right before we started, and I'm the main character's name was Hedwig?
Yeah.
Really? So I agree.
Think they say it literally once.
Yeah. I happened to open up to the page where they used her name, and I'm great. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so do we have any specific thoughts about Hedwig, about our main character? She didn't give us a lot to work with, but if you have anything to say, speak now.
I feel there was strong potential there because when we meet her, right, she's fleeing, and there's this gorgeous visual of her mounting the horse. Her father slips his pistols into her little holster and, gives her a kiss and off she goes. And it's like, ooh, so thrilling. And then, by the end of the book, she's fainted about 7 times. And I'm like, hey, get it together.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It's like that beginning was like the last active thing she did in the whole story. And I also I think especially with classics, but just like female characters in general, it's like I feel like a lot of times people are very critical of female characters who, cry a lot in times of stress, or who faint, or like they get weak or whatever. And a lot of times I'm like, okay, but it does make sense for like a person to have this reaction, it's like, yeah, I know it's annoying when somebody bursts into tears every couple chapters, but like the situation calls for it.
Yeah.
In this book, I'm like, ma'am, like, can you just like keep it together for like a little longer? Like she is passing out all over the place. Like, how did she? I don't understand. It's like she's like blacked out for like half of the story.
Like she gets a pass when she's anemic. Like in those scenes, I'm like, girl, do your thing. Yes. But in the beginning, I feel like there's so many instances where he used it just as like, I don't want to write the aftermath of this scene. I'm going to use that as my scene change. Like, I passed out. After I swooned, this is where I was. New scene. Yeah. I'm like,
exactly. It felt very much like an awkward like writing or plot device. And it just made it really hard to get excited about Hedwig as a main character because she didn't do anything.
She did marry. So
that's true.
She got married.
That was the extent of her choices. Which, to compare it to Dracula by Bram Stoker again, I think especially considering when that book was written, it has some amazing female characters who are like very active, like very competent and smart. I really love how everybody seems to kind of acknowledge that like Mina is the brains of the operation. Like Jonathan Harker is like off like bonking into walls somewhere, and Mina is the one who like gets everyone through things. So especially in comparison to that, I'm like, Hedwig just wasn't a lot there.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. That was
I was just gonna say I feel like she also sort of maybe was a nice prototype for Bella Swan because she felt like empty enough where like I could also put myself in that position. Like there wasn't much to her, and you don't even see really like why she has a stake in anything. Like pun not intended.
Yeah.
But like after a while, I know it's like if she leaves the castle, what's his name? Kostaki?
Yes, Bad Brother's name is Kostaki.
Bad brother, good brother. Bad brother, dark hair. Good brother, blonde hair. We're writing a story.
We're getting to that. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, the beginning had me super hyped for her. By the end, I was like, okay, she's like a woman in a Gothic novel. And like, obviously, not all women in Gothic novels are, have like women that aren't particularly exciting. But I feel like a lot of times their main role is to be preyed upon and to faint.
Right, to swoon onto a divan somewhere. Like,
yeah.
And I almost feel like... No, go ahead. Sorry, Garrett.
No, go ahead, Julia.
No, we've kept you silent long enough. Say your piece. As long as you're not moving on.
No. I was just going to say that, like, obviously, in the course of Pasta Classics, we end up talking about a lot of, like, female characters who are not, like, physically strong or, like, strong female character TM, but who are very, like, interesting and strong and, like, who have agency. Like, I'm thinking of how fired up I get every time I see someone call Margaret Hale like boring or spineless, and I'm like, excuse me, you come into my house. So like there are definitely ways that you can have, like, even in a classic, an interesting woman, or like a woman who, like, even if she's not like running out there and being the one to fight the vampire, it's like she could still be like actively a part of the story and like make decisions and like have ideas, and like Hedwig just did not.
Yeah. I know she couldn't leave, but sometimes I was just like, is this worth it?
Yeah, because he did make that whole spiel about like, as long as you stay here, I will protect you. So it's like, I get she had that motivation going for her, but still. And I think I could have even forgiven her being such a blah character if in return we got their mother being like more of a villain figure in the story. I think that would have been interesting enough for me to be like, okay, go along and let's see where this leads you, you naive little fool. But like, it was just blah on both ends.
Yes, yeah. Lots of blah to go around. And yet that's a good point about her staying put in the castle actually was like a smart decision, even if it wasn't a super active one. I think part of what made Hedwig feel so flat and nothing is like, not only are the other characters also pretty flat, but like all of the interactions and relationships and connections. Like we'll get into Gregoriska in a minute, but like the romance was like actually kind of ridiculous. And so like the fact that she was like so like quite literally ready to die for this man that she met like 3 days ago or whatever, it just made her feel even more nothing.
No, it's even worse than that, because there's a time jump. She mentions that it's like 3 months that go by, and he just skips over 3 months of character development that we could have gotten between the three of them. This love triangle could have been so juicy.
Yeah.
We're going to get into it.
I felt so bad for you, Julia.
Instead, it was a time jump and her going, we've never spoken, but we love each other. And he tells me every day he loves me, but I hate him. And I'm like, this is the most boring love triangle I've ever read. It's not even a love triangle.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go ahead and segue into the brothers. That I literally just wrote Gregoriska, good. Kostaki, bad. Do we have like any other, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, but like it's not just they're really flat and have absolutely no personality, but it's like let's sprinkle some like racism or like xenophobia, like I don't know, like the number of times that the main character would like think in her head like, ew, there's Kostaki being an Eastern European over there, like it's just like it's really weird. And it reminded me a lot of like Three Musketeers, where there would just be these like casual references. I mean, sometimes they weren't like as malicious as in this book, but it's like when we were laughing because like every other sentence it felt like when we were introducing D'Artagnan was like, well, you know, and I'm like, what?
Wait, sorry, you froze up.
Oh no. Okay. I was saying like when we read Three Musketeers, there was like that part at the beginning where D'Artagnan was being introduced, and every other line was like, well, he's a Gascon, so he doesn't do that. Like, instead of characterization, he was just telling us the region he was from. Yeah,
because we're experts. We know what that means.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you seen that TikTok that's like people who make their city their whole personality?
I have not, but
it's like, oh, you know, we don't play like that. I'm from West Ticklestown. Or like, you know how we Wigglesboro people like go down, stuff like that. And like, it's kind of like Alexandre Dumas.
Yeah, that's so him.
Yes, Julia, take notes for the meme roundup. Please.
Yeah, hold on. West Tickletown, got it.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go, Taylor.
I will say there is something very funny about having this freak brother that lives in the woods and like is kind of a murderer, and everyone's like, you know, that's just Kostaki?
I think, yeah.
Oh, Kostaki, yeah. They're like, that's just Kostaki, our woodland freak of a brother.
Yeah, if this was Twilight, he really should be a werewolf, TBH.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We won't get into that.
Yeah, I agree. Like there was like a certain amount of fun from this book that was just purely how bonkers it was, and like none of the characters noticed or cared. Like
yeah.
Which in itself I feel like is sort of a time-honored tradition in vampire classics. Like
True.
I'm thinking of Jonathan Harker looking out the window at the Count's castle, and he sees him just like Spider-Man climbing up the wall, and Jonathan, he's just like, that's weird, and like he just goes about his day. So
you know how they do.
Yeah.
It's just so like, I don't know, there's just something so funny about Jonathan Harker being so clueless. Aren't there like 3 scary women that also like run around the castle giggling? And he's like, who are these like crazy ladies?
Yeah, or like Dracula at one point like has him write out a letter to his wife saying, I'm fine, I'm definitely not dead, and like signs it, and at no point is Jonathan like, this feels dangerous.
I wonder why he had me write that.
Yeah, he is so lucky he has Mina, because oh my god, that man would be dead so fast. He's like a proto-himbo, like he just
He is.
no brain. Yeah. So the other thing about, well, okay, Julia, let's discuss the tragic underutilization of the love triangle setup, because I think you're our expert on that.
Yeah, and first
you
of all,
have the floor.
I also just want to add, like, within this conversation too, that I think it was such a cool, interesting dynamic to make them half brothers and make the bastard be the mom's favorite. Like, that's such a fun extra level of spice to be like, that's not even her legitimate child and she still likes him more than you, but for some reason he doesn't seem to have like any mommy issues, and I'm like, that would give me some issues. I don't know, but
yeah.
They're really, I think there could have been more tension between the brothers. Yeah, so the problem is with this love triangle is that Hedwig does not like Kostaki at all, and I think we really could have benefited either from a period where she didn't quite know how bad he was, and so she was just like kind of in the midst of like figuring things out in this new environment, or a period where she was like wooed by him and then realized like, oh no, but his brother has been here the whole time, you know, being so sweet and supportive. Like, I eat that up. But it was neither. It was just a blanket, like from the start, blonde hair, blue-eyed, good guy, dark hair, brown-eyed, bad guy. And it was just so like tired and stale and boring. And I mean, literally, like when Kostaki like had her in his arms on horseback in the very first scene where they all meet, the description is like her literally craning her neck to look, what's his name? Gregoriska. Yeah. She's like craning her neck to look at him and be like, oh, I wish I was on his horse. And I'm like, girl, we just got started. So it was just incredibly lackluster.
Even if like Kostaki was sorry, Kara.
No, I just said I agree.
Even if Kostaki like was still this weird freak, like weird possessive freak that he is, like if they had described him as incredibly sexy, like maybe there isn't any sort of emotional connection, she just thinks he's so hot, and that's what sways her at first, and then she's like, wait, this brother who's kind of mid-looking but really nice likes me too, and he's not like threatening to kill me.
Many a woman has been swayed to turn a red flag into a yellow flag by a good-looking face. So that could have easily been believable.
It really was like Kostaki was just there as like a plot device, because like there was no like there was like no actual, like you said, Julia, like tension. Like we knew she wasn't gonna choose him actually for a while, because the love triangle was like so flat that I was like, maybe we're setting up for a twist where like the main, like Gregoriska, who's like fawning all over her and honestly being a little creepy about it sometimes. I'm like, what if like the brother everyone thinks is evil is actually not? And then the story keeps going and I'm like, oh no, okay, no twist. Like,
I was mistaken.
I was mistaken. And also kind of like we were talking about, it's also that she hates Kostaki immediately for like no reason, because we do eventually find out like, oh, he's like, what did you say, Taylor? Like the freak brother in the woods.
He's got like leaves and twigs in his hair.
But like for a while we don't actually know any of that, so like her whole basis for which brother she likes is just like, ew, gross, he's got brown hair. And I'm like,
well, I mean, you could there is kind of the will he or won't he murder me upon their first meeting, which is kind of iffy.
Right, but it's like, I think because like Gregoriska, like he wasn't doing that kind of thing, but the way he interacted with her also felt kind of like creepy to me. So there was like a little bit of time in the story where I feel like the brothers were like equally uncomfy. But that is a good point, is that like pretty soon he's just there to like threaten everyone with murder. Which he is so shocked that doesn't win over the lady he loves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that he's straight up the opposite of the trope we always say we like, where we're talking about the guys who are like, I'll sit here and pine for you forever. If I just have to sit here and be miserable, it doesn't matter as long as I can love you in silence. And Kostaki's like, if you loved anyone else, I would kill you before see you be with that man. And it's like, oh, okay.
All right. It's very normal.
Yeah.
Feral brother indeed.
I'm just like rewriting this in my head because I do think this could make like a good movie if they zhuzhed it up a bit. And because it's so short, it leaves a lot of room for like adding cool things. And so even like the tension between the brothers could be heightened by the fact that like maybe we see the fight between the brothers, the fatal fight on page or on screen. And maybe we could have Hedwig come in very late and just see the final blow. And then that be sort of like, oh my God, who do I believe here? Mm-hmm. But like, you don't even see that. They just sort of like, what's his name? Gregoriska like runs away. Kostaki's like, I'm going to kill him. And then like leaves. And then they come back and Gregoriska's like, no, I killed him. And that's like it.
Yeah.
I feel like you could have this heightened like fight or battle or something, and then that adds tension between like Hedwig, who's like not sure which one was the instigator in the fight.
Yeah, because I thought that was incredibly suspicious when Gregoriska came back and he's like, I killed my evil brother, and that's all you need to know about it. Like, I thought that was, again, I kind of was hoping that was setting up for like something more interesting, and it did not. That's the bottom line. It's like, every time this story was like setting up to be more interesting, it was like, just kidding.
Yeah, it was actually less interesting because he's like, oh, I didn't kill him. He just ran himself into my sword. Like, he didn't even have the balls to do it.
Yeah. I will say like one of the scenes that was a highlight, and that like I thought the atmosphere was really good and the tension actually felt really interesting, was with Smirond. The mom.
Yeah. Love her name. That's great. Great name.
Smirond. Yeah. I'm sure it's pronounced much prettier than I'm saying it. So I apologize to whatever language that is. Although maybe Alexandre Dumas didn't know either, because I'm like, this doesn't sound like Polish or
she sounds like a Lord of the Rings character, let's be real.
She does. She does. So the scene that I actually thought was really good is like the funeral for Kostaki, and like her realizing, like Hedwig kind of starting to figure out what's going on, and like the way the mom was like talking about like how she actually knew that her son was like that was so interesting, and like I really wish there were more scenes like that. Also, on the topic of the battle you were discussing, Taylor, also there's that, so that we have like that battle that we don't see, and then we have the battle that we do see, which is like after Kostaki comes back as a vampire. And like this was one of the points in the book where I'm like, what was the point of this story? Because they have their huge duel. I think Hedwig is there for like most of it, or she at least like sees the end, and Gregoriska does manage to slay Kostaki, but then he just like falls over and Hedwig is like, what? Like, were you stabbed? Are you bleeding? And he's like, no, I'm just really tired, so I'm gonna die now.
What a mood, honestly.
Yeah, so relatable.
It is, but like it was so ridiculous. Let me find the line, because he was basically like,
it's absurd.
Yes, he said like, so Gregoriska stood still over his adversary, but faintly and staggering. I ran up and caught him in my arms. Are you wounded? I asked him anxiously. No, he answered me, but in such a contest, dear Hedwig, 'tis not the wound that kills, but the stress and struggle. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like science.
It sounds like life. I don't know.
Like, it is relatable and funny, but I'm also like, that's how you choose to end this dramatic sword fight? Like,
no, really though. Related, I'm backing up a little bit to two things. One, Taylor, I completely agree with how you said like this would be an amazing movie, because the whole time reading it, it just felt so absurd but gothic but nonsensical that I was like, this is like a black and white 1938 movie that I rented on Canopy, and I'm like, what's going on? But I like watch it anyways because it's like cool cinematography. Like, that is what this story is.
Yeah.
And I think that would be really dramatic for her to like, because I'm picturing Hedwig being like behind like all this foliage so she can kind of see what's going on, but she doesn't like see exactly how Kostaki is killed, and then she like runs away because she's like, oh my god, like she sees him fall down.
Yeah,
it would just be so dramatic. And
and maybe we could actually have Gregoriska be stabbed instead of just dying of tiredness.
Yeah. Like, Kostaki had maybe one last stab in him, and he does that, but no, he's just really sleepy, and he's like, I'm gonna take a nap now.
Forever.
I mean, I know part of the vampire like mythos is just the author will say something and you're like, sure, that makes sense, but him being like, take the bloody dirt and put it on your wound, goodbye.
Like, oh, this will protect you.
Okay. Sure, I guess.
I have so many questions. Like, because it's not just that like the confrontation scene itself ended up being pretty disappointing, but it's also like that's basically the end of the story. And like we have a little bit with like Hedwig just being like, and that's my story of being loved by two brothers, one of whom was a batshit crazy vampire man living in the woods, and then the other was blonde. Like that's like really how it ends. And so I'm just like, we're like, what was like the story supposed to give us? I don't know. Like, I just don't understand, because like it wasn't, I don't know, there wasn't actually as spooky vampire story with a forest and a castle. And then the relationships were like really boring. So it didn't even feel meaningful that she lost the man she loved at the end. It was just kind of like, okay. So I don't know how to articulate it, but there are some books where I finish them and I'm like, it's not that nothing happened, but I feel like nothing happened. It's like we just, what was the point?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, can I share what my theory was in the book that I think would have made it stronger? Mm-hmm. So when we get Gregoriska coming back and being like, "Oh, brother, he's dead," actually like not admitting it yet, but his, their mother being like, "Where is Kostaki?" And he's like, "Couldn't tell you. There's definitely not any blood on my forehead. I don't know where he is." But I do like that little like line with the like biblical imagery of Hedwig being like, "Isn't that what God asked Cain?" I was like, "Whoa,
yes, am I my brother's
sweet
keeper?" Yeah.
There's actually quite a few. There's like a good religious thematic thing going on. Anyways, but so we get that, and then the reveal of his death. And what I was thinking by the time, because their mother's like such an enigma, she's such an interesting character, right? Like where, Hedwig can't understand anything she says because they don't have any common languages. And she's just like this imposing princess from some place she's never been. So she's, like I said, enigmatic. So once he was dead, and then they like have that, Kara, like you said, kind of really good funeral scene. I won't lie. I liked that beginning of that chapter. Or was that the beginning? Whatever part of that was. Of a chapter.
Yeah.
And then she gives the really like ominous delivery again of like, Kostaki loves Hedwig. And she's like, what do you mean present tense he loves me? And she like freaks out because it is like kind of, it didn't actually give me chills, but like in my soul, it gave me chills.
It was
so
good.
In my head, I was like, okay, so this whole time their mom has been a vampire. And so now she's like, my son isn't dead because I know he's a vampire. And so this whole funeral, I thought, was a setup for a vampire wedding because she like dressed her in the widow's weeds, right? And so in my mind, I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. She's setting her up to be with him finally. And then it was just a funeral and I was really bored and disappointed. Yeah. But I think that would have been so juicy for them to have like this strong antagonistic duo and she's trapped in this marriage, but she still loves the other brother. It could have been great.
Yeah. I feel like all of our ideas about what we thought was going to happen are like so much more interesting.
And this is why we need to write the screenplay for our adaptation of The Pale Lady.
Yes. Take that, Alexandre Dumas. We're just as good, if not better writers than you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I just opened... when I said, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just opened to the page of the part you were talking about, Julia, where Smirond says, where is your brother? In spite of myself, I could not help thinking it was the same question God had asked of Cain. Gregoriska said nothing. Like, that's so good. Like, this whole scene is so juicy. It's like, look at what we could have had. What were you going to say, Taylor?
No, I mean, that is such a good line, too. When I mentioned like freaks plural earlier, the mom was a second freak in the book. Like no one's going to talk about how like obsessed she is with Hedwig marrying Kostaki. Like I mean, obviously she doesn't speak a lot of Polish is what I'm assuming Hedwig speaks, but like I'm like, she's really like such a freak. Like the widow's weeds thing only made sense if she were like a vampire or like knew about her son being a vampire, but it's like, oh no, she's just weird.
Yeah, she's just weird. And I love that they gave her so much credit to be like, she learned 3 French words just so she could say that to her. And I'm like, she learned 1 French word because the other 2 words in that sentence are names. Okay. Like she learned 1 word.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I even have, like, we talked about the romance and the plot, which are kind of the same thing. Like, I feel like the overall plot was, like, the love triangle with vampires. Although, like, surprisingly low-key on the vampire element.
Yeah, I did want more vampire from this book, even if it was just, like, a little bit of, like, more mystery. Like she's not sure what is going on, so she has to do some research on like she saw Kostaki in the night and she's like, but he's dead, is he a ghost?
Yeah.
And she has like there's like a research sequence or something where she uncovers like a vampire and I don't know.
Very Twilight, very Jennifer's Body.
And it's such a short story that it seems odd to me that it takes so long before we have confirmation of actual vampire.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. I do think, although some of it is weird, I think there's like some interesting vampire lore that he came up with. Yes. Like I like the clock, like striking whatever, like the time that he died. And then she's like, oh, that's strange. Like, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it would have been hilarious if he had died at like 11 in the morning. And then like every day before lunch, she's like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like looking through to see.
I feel like it's like 9:45.
Right.
Yeah. I also like, I sort of, like going back to the final confrontation, I wish there was more spoken between the brothers. Like there's the religious stuff where Gregoriska is like, oh, you should repent. Mm-hmm. And Kostaki is like, nope. And not even like a reason why he doesn't want to repent. Like, oh, I'm better than you now at everything. Or like, this is how I'm going to get Hedwig with my sexy vampire skills or whatever. And then I don't know, more tension between the two of them and not like a God versus Satan thing is fine, but it's like, but they're brothers though. And they were roommates.
Roommates.
Yeah, I guess one of the good things about having such a short story is like every time I open it, I'm like, this is a specific part we were just discussing.
Yeah.
It's when after the funeral, when the mother says, Kostaki loves you. You can form no conception of the effect these words produced on me. This declaration of love made in the present instead of in the past tense. This loves you instead of loved you. This passion from the world of the dead, singling me out among the living, made a profound and terrible impression on my mind. Like, that's such a good line. And like even the part after that, at the same time, a strange, uncanny feeling crept over me that in very deed I was the wife of the dead man and not the betrothed of the living brother. Yeah. Like there's some good, there's like a good like element here.
There is some meat in here. It was just like surrounded by so many weird things that it didn't quite deliver.
Yeah.
I agree, Nina. We need to rewrite this book.
I mean, it's old enough. It's public domain. We can do what we want.
I know. Yeah.
I also love, because I flipped, again, just happened to flip open to a part where I'm like, oh, interesting. The part where, what is their mom's name? The mother.
Smirond.
Like has Gregoriska swear to kill his brother's murderer, which in the moment has such tension because you're like, oh my God, he's swearing to end his own life right now. Yeah. But then it's an interesting twist, I guess, like reading it back, knowing that he like wasn't really the one responsible. So in a way, he's like swearing to end his brother's life as a vampire because he's like, my brother ended his own life. Yeah. So that's juicy.
Yeah. I also, this is another thing that made me suspicious of Gregoriska is like when he's, I mean, I'm always like a little nerve-wracking when the main character is like doesn't speak any of the languages of the other characters and she has to rely for a translation for any conversation that happens. And when Gregoriska says, show neither embarrassment nor distrust and speak Polish. No one understands that tongue here. I will translate your words to my mother and rest assured I will only say what should be said. I'm like, I don't know.
I can rest assured, okay?
Yeah, it's like we don't know you that well, Gregoriska. All we know is that you're not Kostaki. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just real suspicious of like
well, yeah,
he was so over the top. Yeah.
You interrupted and like saved her life, but for what motivation? Like we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Any other thoughts on the Pale Lady? I do think it is like a fun one to discuss, I think. But
yeah.
I will say, because I'm a Gregoriska apologist who just like wants him to be a sweet golden retriever boy, because he is technically. I love the part when he's like, oh, my mom's gonna love you. I mean, you're so beautiful. And then he was like, who could not love you? It's like, oh, wait a second. That's kind of cute.
Yeah.
Because he was like, I'm not talking about myself. I'm just being like,
just wow. Like theoretically, yeah. Nina says, if they're that old, don't you think they'd have the time to learn a second language? Mm-hmm. These are lazy vampires on top of everything.
I do love, like, during the funeral when Smirand, however you, I don't know how to pronounce her name, she's, like, making Gregoriska swear to kill his brother's murderer. She's like, you've got to kill him. Like, you have to swear vengeance. And Gregoriska's like, ooh, sure. yeah, no. We'll get him. We'll get him for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
He's like, do you know who killed him? Because I don't. I have no idea who did this.
Yeah. There was like some moments like that where it was very funny and I was like, how much of this is intentional? Yeah. Let's see. There's also the part where like, and this happens in Dracula too, and so I understand also that like especially at the time this book was set in, not just when it was written, it's like vampire lore was not nearly as like famous, but it's like always interesting when like the main female character is like, I'm so tired and pale and I have bite marks on my neck. What could be happening to me?
I love the first time when she goes, looks like I got bitten by a bug last night, and goes back to sleep. I'm like, yeah, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like the line where she they like promise that they're gonna go run off and get married, and she says, well, here, let me just read it instead of trying to paraphrase. The day passed amid such fears and anxieties as may be imagined. I had confined our projects to no living soul. Hardly in my prayers had I dared to tell God of them, yet I felt as though these plans were known to all the world, that every look cast my way had power to penetrate my heart and read my inmost thoughts. Like, I love that idea of like, I can't even like think about it, pray about it. Like, I can't let anyone know. It's just
I also thought this was during that like funeral scene too that we all agree was one of the highlights. I think.
Yes.
I thought this was really interesting that they described like Gregoriska like really reluctantly approaching the body. Mm-hmm. The nearer he approached the corpse, the more abundantly did the red blood gush from the wound. Happily, Smeron was not looking that way, for at sight of this accusing flood, she would have had no need to look further for the murderer. And so that is like based on this old like superstition that when a corpse, like when someone's dead body was like approached by the murderer, like the person who killed them, that the wounds would like start bleeding again.
Visually, that's so terrifying,
right? And like, and you can see how that kind of belief would like, I don't know, would persist, because that is such like a like in a weird way, it kind of like makes sense, like on a non-logical but like very like emotional level. It's like, yeah, that somebody that even after death, like the murder victim remembers who killed them, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I thought that was just like a passing thing that was very interesting.
Yeah, agreed. Sort of speaking on like cinematic language, I do love the scene where like they're waiting for the brothers to come back and they hear like the footsteps in the hall, and you have this brother, you see it like a male figure emerging from the shadows, and I'm just imagining like from a film perspective, like it's backlit, so you only see the light, like the moonlight coming from behind him, and it's all dark. And then eventually it comes further, and he's just standing. It's Gregoriska, but like that moment of tension, I was like, this would make such a good movie shot.
Yes, like just the silhouette backlit, like so good. So good. And the footsteps, and she doesn't know who it is. On him, camera's on him. He's like sweat. And then it's back to him, and just like the footsteps, like coming down the hall, and it's like, who is it? It's so juicy.
Yeah, I think the opening sentence is pretty strong as well. I am a Pole by birth, a native of Sandomir, a land where legends become articles of faith, and where we believe in our family traditions as firmly as in the gospel, perhaps more firmly. Like, that's such a good, like, set the scene kind of line.
Yeah. Now, if they put that more into the book or something, like bringing along her, like, Polish or, like, Sandomiran, like, legend into this, like, oh my god, my grandmother told me this story of like wounds that reopen when like the murder is by the corpse. I think that would be a cool way to bring in like her own knowledge and have her sort of like, you know, have
contribute.
Contribute to what's going on.
Yeah, well, literally, that's so true, because like when we finally get the moment where Gregoriska's like, I don't know, maybe you've heard lore of these things, and she's like, oh, vampires, and he's like, yeah, those. It's like, well, so you didn't suspect anything earlier until he's like, maybe you've heard of them, and you're like, of course I've heard of them. It's like, well, then why now?
Yeah. And then we at least have something like she brings the intelligence that everyone else lacks to the situation.
Right.
Yeah, because there's still the tension of being like, oh my God, these are all the signs that I've been bitten by a vampire. Where's this vampire? Who is this vampire? Why is it after me? Like,
yeah,
there's still that. And then we would get this nice, like dramatic irony of us as the readers being like, it's Kostaki, you idiot. And she's being like, I have to find out who the vampire is. Like,
yeah. And then you could have, like, if we have this alternate reality where Smarand is, like, in on Kostaki being a vampire, she could notice, like, the two things and be, like, the two, like, or the bite mark and be like, oh, a bug bit you, and sort of, like, gaslight her.
Yes.
So that way, like, the main character is, like, worried that, like, maybe I'm overblowing this. Yeah. Maybe I was bitten by a poison spider or something.
No, well, listen, and I'm reading the Hacienda right now, and I love all of this. What you're saying is great.
I also think, like, if we weren't going to do the straightforward, like, oh, the brother you think is bad is good, and vice versa, I also think it could have been so interesting. And again, this is something I kind of thought might happen because of the, like, sketchy vibes that Gregoriska gave off sometimes as well. Was that he also was a vampire, that like she's like going to tell him, like, I think your brother's a vampire, and he's like, oh yeah, he is, all of us are vampires, you know, like that could have been so interesting. And then we could have had that like uncertainty about like, all right, are there like good guy vampires here, like what is going on, like who to trust vampires. And all of that. I also kind of related to the like the xenophobia element that we were discussing, and how much that, like, it was referenced so many times, even after, like, okay, we know now Kostaki is genuinely bad, but the number of times that it was like connected with, like, there he is being all, I don't know, Slavic or like whatever, like sinisterly standing with his brown hair. I also feel like there was a lot of emphasis on like bloodlines, and which like is weird because as we were talking about, the mother actually prefers the son who is illegitimate, but then we get things like, where is it? Like Kostaki, I am the elder. That is to say, I am master everywhere, in the castle no less than in the forest, there as well as here. Oh yes, I am of the blood of the Brankovans as much as you. 'Tis royal blood and is wont to be obeyed. I order and I must be obeyed. And I feel like there was a lot of, even for Hedwig, there was a lot of references to like her parentage and her noble lineage, and like that just like part of what made the things Kostaki was like threatening her with like so unthinkable and so bad. She's like, but I'm a lady. I'm not just a village woman. Anyway, so I don't know if you guys had thoughts on that, if that was something that you also noticed. Yeah. Any thoughts on like the use of like bloodlines, which is also funny in a vampire story.
Bloodlines, no pun intended.
Yeah.
I like didn't really think about it much, but I think because like a lot of people back then just sort of like talked about their bloodline, both I guess as a way to sort of discuss like family history and like where they come from, and also to sort of like show off that they might be like fourth cousins with someone who's a princess.
Yeah.
Right.
So like it wasn't really something that like crossed my mind, but it is like, if I ever reread this freak book again, it's something to think about.
Yeah. Food for thought. Yeah, I think that's just about everything. Are there anything you guys want to talk about, or especially any like specific scenes or moments? Because as I was saying, like I similarly did not feel like this book left much of an impression on me in terms of like specific moments. So I'm probably forgetting things that would be interesting to talk about.
I feel like overall my thoughts have been laid out there. I do have one specific quote that I would like to share. So I don't know if we're in that portion yet.
Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Okay. And again, this is back in the towards the beginning where I think it could have been so juicy either to like have that like will they won't they thing going with Kostaki, or Kara, like you said, like a bait and switch sort of quote, because I love this. Kostaki, the untamable being you yourself have seen, this is Gregoriska talking, whose passions are his only law, who holds nothing sacred in all the world but his mother, who only obeys me as the tiger does the man that has mastered him by sheer force, and this with a never-ceasing growl of protest in vain hope of one day devouring me. That is so good.
Yeah.
Like, what a setup for a character that is.
Yeah.
This man obeys nothing but his passions and his mommy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not only is he a crazy woodsman, he's also a mama's boy.
Yeah, he is.
Do we have like, I feel like this has sort of been a lot of the like suggestions of things that we would change, but like, do you have any thoughts on how, like, if this setup were done today, on how things might be different? Or I don't know if like if we had any other thoughts on that, like, since we have already been talking about it quite a bit. But like one thing I think is just what we were saying about like the way, like setting up Gregoriska as like the good guy and Kostaki as the bad guy, and having it be so weirdly backed up. But also I think just in terms of the main conflict of this story, I think if this were done now, it wouldn't be that straightforward. Like we would have some kind of twist, like either they're all vampires, or the main character was a vampire all along, or like yeah, or like one of like the brother that you thought was bad actually is like anything like that. I think one of those like shocking twists would have to be in here, because I think this is just like very straightforward in terms of the antagonist, which I guess in itself could be a twist too, but wasn't the way it was done here.
Something that I think would be interesting, and once again I'm thinking about this in a film context, but I think a lot of elements from film translate over to, or from books translate over to film, and it's the pistols her father gives her at the beginning. And I don't know if vampires are like in vampire lore silver bullets do anything, but it could be like maybe while like Gregoriska and Kostaki are like fighting and struggling, she like remembers that she has a gun that her father gave her, and she has to run and grab it, and she like shoots him, and if the bullet works, she saves the day. And it goes back to like, you could tie it into the war where she feels like she lost her home and her culture, and now she's using something that her father gave her or passed on to her to sort of reclaim her life, as a sort of like, oh, I am like from this place, and this thing that my father gave me that was made in my home is what saved me at the end of the day. And then, or if it's like the silver bullet doesn't do anything, like the force of the bullet like blows the brother back, or like he stops, and that gives Gregoriska just enough time to deliver the finishing blow.
Yeah. And also I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I had forgotten the character setup we get for Hedwig at the beginning, which is like very traumatic and doesn't seem to come up at all ever like after that. What were you going to say, Julia?
I was going to say, but hear me out, because her father is the one who sent her off, right? Like, oh yeah, go to this convent where your mother went and you'll be safe there. But he obviously, to send her somewhere, he must know how like the path she needs to take to get there. So he's aware of the dangers on her way. And so he gives her these pistols, and she doesn't know, but they've got like these little wooden bullets that are like tiny little stakes. And so when she in desperation goes to shoot Kostaki, it actually works because she shot him through the heart. And her father like helped her, and she was like, oh my gosh, my family's still with me.
Yeah. And he tells her like something like they're like vampires or creatures in the woods, and she's like, that's just a Polish fairy tale. And then it comes through and it brings it back to her culture.
Or like even really like vague. Like we get maybe the establishing shots of her as a child, like hearing the folklore. But when he's like setting her off to go, he's like, there are dangers in these woods unimaginable to you. And she's like, whatever, Dad, gotta go.
Yeah. Or even, okay, like he gives her the two pistols and he says like one of them is for, you know, the bad people you might meet, and this other one is for things that are worse than people. And she like, yeah, and like she tries them both, you know, or like she tries the human one and it doesn't work and she's like, this is ridiculous, but I guess I'll try. Like,
put Nina's comment up. She's correct. We've done it, folks.
I know. Past It Classics Productions presents. Like,
I would watch this movie so eagerly. You don't even know.
Yeah. Also, could I just say the title, The Pale Lady, totally makes it sound like she's going to be a vampire.
Like, yeah. Or I thought Miranda was going to be the vampire.
Yeah.
Yes. He does come around at the end to be like, and she's pale for the rest of her life, as is with all victims of vampires. But it's like, that's stupid. I thought she was going to be the vampire as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I think that's everything. Thank you guys. Thanks, Nana, for your contributions. Thank you to anyone watching this back later being like, what did you guys read? Like,
we didn't read. We wrote, and
yes. I'm just seeing the mini steak bullets shoot out of her gun in slow-mo. Yeah. She's like wooden bullets. This is so stupid. But, what's that, Julia?
I said I'm just outing myself as a fan of the movie Van Helsing as I'm saying these types of things. But it's okay.
Yeah. Julia, do you want to introduce our next book pick?
Yes, I have it nearby. Hold on. We are currently reading Poor Miss Finch by Wilkie Collins. This is a story about a blind girl and her companion, would you say? And a love triangle with two brothers, which hopefully will have a little more nuance than this one.
Yes.
But we shall see. And we will talk about this most likely at the end of June.
Yes.
Knock on wood.
Yes. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Taylor and Julia, for talking about this wild ride. This truly bananas little vampire story. Like Alexandre Dumas writing his silly little stories with his silly little vampires.
He was in a silly, goofy mood that day, you know.
He was. Like, all right. We will see you all later for Poor Miss Finch, and keep an eye on our Twitter account for our like, hey, this is happening in 20 minutes. Like, see you there.
And our Instagram. We have it there too.
Yes. Well, and we'll try every time we say this, we'll try to give more warning than before, but sometimes things change last minute. So I'm sorry. We love you anyway.
Bye.
Bye.